The poem Abschied, written by Edvard Moriker in 1838 and set by Hugo 50 years later, recounts a humorous episode in the life of an artist that would undoubtedly have touched a nerve with the composer. The lyric protagonist in this scenario is confronted by a man who walks unannounced into his home, promptly declaring, "Ich habe die Ehre, Ihr Rezensent zu sein. I have the honour of being your critic." This unwanted visitor proceeds to examine the artist's physiognomy, severely upbraiding him, amongst other things, for the excessive size of his nose. Having had his fill of criticism, the protagonist soon takes leave of the intruder by imparting a tremendous kick on his backside, thus sending the unhappy critic tumbling down the stairs in a scene that Wolf crowns with a raucously triumphant waltz. While such a response may seem extreme, the invasive criticism described by the song offends on a level beyond the absurdity that it is the artist's nose under scrutiny. A crucial aspect of the farce in Moriker's poem, which is reproduced in full on page 1 of your handout, consists in a more subtle detail of the critic's behaviour. Without looking the subject of his aspersions in the face, he instead takes a light in hand so as to cast the protagonist's shadow on the wall, examining only this abstract projection of his form. The song's optical metaphor, in illuminating the gulf between critical methods of gazing and objects of aesthetic critique themselves, cuts to the heart of regulative theory's ever-problematic relationship to artistic practice. In its remarkable sensitivity to the musical connotations of Moriker's satire, Wolf's second gives us apt pause to reflect on the often fraught relationship between his vast corpus of songs and the brands of criticism and music theory characteristic of his time and our own. From 1884 to 1887, Wolf, then a young musician living in Vienna, had earned money by writing reviews of the city's concert life for the Sunday edition of the Wiener Salonblatt, a publication that Sandra McCall has described as, quote, not so much a newspaper as a women's magazine. Given the obvious musical glee that his setting of Abschied takes in the idea of a critic being kicked down the stairs, we might be surprised to learn that Wild Wolf, as he came to be known, took equal delight in savaging Johannes Brahms at the tip of his own razor-sharp pen, comparing the composer to a chicken, and asserting in one 1884 review that, quote, there is more intelligence and sensitivity in a single cymbal crash in a work of Liszt's than in all 3 of Brahms's symphonies, with the serenades thrown in for good measure. One would be forgiven for thinking that, having gone to such lengths to undermine what he perceived as the book-bound pedantry of Hanswickian conservatism, Wolf would have rejected harmony treatises outright as tools belonging exclusively to the Beckmessers of the Academy. Like many of his contemporaries, however, Wolf's relationship to music theory was far more complex and ambiguous than we might expect. Responding to critical commentary on the Moriker Lieder in a letter to his friend Emil Kaufmann, for example, the composer writes, quote, the reproach that I commit successions of unresolved dissonances could do me no harm, for the simple reason that I am in a position to demonstrate how each of my boldest discords can be justified by the strictest rule of the theory of harmony. Naturally, Wolf does not go so far as to specify which theory of harmony he means. The salient fact here is that, far from kicking his music theory treatises down the stairs, Wolf actively appeals to the strictest rule of the theory of harmony as a means to underpin compositional decisions. Reconciling the music of the future with the music theory of the present required considerable adaptation and revisionism on the part of sympathetic 19th century theorists. Few advocates of Zukunftsmusik could claim to be as dedicated to this project as Carl Friedrich Weitzmann, a figure who has been subject to Renaissance over the last 2 decades, primarily in connection to his 1853 treatise Der übermäßige Dreiklang, or the Augmented Triad, and its implications for emerging neo-Riemannian theories of harmony. In contextualizing Wolf's appeal to music theory, this treatise is instructive as a means of situating the songs in a system of harmony developed explicitly to defend the works of Wolf's foremost influences, Liszt and Wagner, against the conservative detractors poked fun at in the Abschied setting with which I began. From the opening paragraphs of his treatise, Weitzmann's humanization of the Augmented Triad is striking. He even goes so far as to refer to the chord as his Schutzring, which translates roughly as fostering or protege. The dissonant sonority, he begins, quote, has been regarded until now by all theorists and practical musicians as a sinister guest, whom one believed one must get rid of as soon as possible. Its questionable lineage aroused distrust. Its rough manner and apparent awkwardness were not suited to winning it friends. The testimonial of our best older and newer theorists, which either denied it any rights of a native or at best endured its fleeting passage, were not suited to awakening interest in it. Adopting a quasi-political rhetoric of social inclusion, Weitzmann reacted against previous generations of theorists in defense of the augmented triad's prominence in the works of a new German school. His contempt for the attitudes of his predecessors is evident in his introductory survey to the chords placed in historical treatises from Rameau's 1722 Traité de la Harmonie to A.B. Marx's Allgemeine Musiklehre of 1850. Published a mere 3 years prior to Der übermäßige Dreiklang, Marx's book stands as one of the most influential theory treatises of the era and, as a stark contrast to Weitzmann's theory, is offered as a point of departure from which to set his radical project in relief. Having identified the major, minor, and diminished triads, Marx asserts that the sense of these chords is best felt when one repeats them in succession, describing the character of all the octave star examples for each in turn. Only once he has created what is effectively a descending aesthetic hierarchy does Marx deign to introduce the augmented triad. In the discussion that follows, I have, for clarity, followed Timothy McKinney in distinguishing the 4 enharmonically unique versions of the chord by adopting the shorthand Aug 1, Aug 2, Aug 3, and Aug 4, where Arabic numerals indicate the inclusion of one of the 4 pitch classes ascending from C to E flat. Presenting readers with the example of a C major triad ascending chromatically through the first 3 of these 4 augmented triads, Marx provided Weitzmann with a provocative point of departure by describing the sense of the chord as follows, quote, "If we return to the major third and raise the 5th, the shrill sound of the augmented triad confronts us. A sequence of such triads has never, at least up to the present, been dared, and we would not know how to account for anyone's motivation in doing so." Obsolescence is the unhappy but inevitable fate of any harmony treatise claiming that a certain progression has never been dared. Sure enough, returning to Hugo Wolf's Abschied, we find exactly such a progression beginning at bar 32. This is precisely the moment in which the critic, having raised the light to the artist's head, begins aggressively to chastise the youth for his bodily defects. Nun, liebe junger Mann, sehen Sie Gott gefälligst mal Ihre Nase so von der Seite an, Sie geben zu, dass das ein Auswärts ist. See here, young man, try to view your own nose from the side. You'll agree with me that it's enormous. Just as Weitzmann openly attacked anterior theorists for treating the augmented triad as a sinister guest or mere transitory fugitive, so can we hear Wolf, the critic, in his setting of Morocc's scenario, railing against musical conservatism and its wholesale rejection of dissonant progressions. Clearly, Marx's Allgemeine Musiklehre is a poor candidate for the theory of harmony invoked by Wolf in his correspondence with Kaufmann, especially given that the progression that appears in Abschied is no isolated deviation. On the contrary, Timothy McKinney has demonstrated that the augmented triad series constitutes a recurring trope in Wolf's output, lending credence to the idea that the composer interpolated the progression into Abschied as a means of indexing his boldest discords elsewhere. Weitzmann's harmony treatise, on the other hand, would seem to be a much better fit for Wolf's music. In contrast to Marx, Weitzmann favours a dualist approach that interprets, for instance, the F minor triad as the nebenverwandt mirror image of the C major triad. The augmented triad, then, is both visually and conceptually central, formed from the tonic note C flanked by a major third on either side. Significantly, Weitzmann interprets the notes belonging to each key's nebenverwandt triadic partner as Nebentöne, or secondary tones to that key. The flattened submediant of the major scale and the sharpened reading tone of the minor scale, he tells us, serve as the most important Nebentöne. The fact that these tones can be prepared in any key by the insertion of an augmented triad, sharing its 2 remaining tones with the unaltered diatonic scale, contributed significantly to Weitzmann's growing appraisal of the chord's efficacy in achieving modulation. There is a long history of commentary on Wolf's songs highlighting the augmented triad as a key feature of his compositional language. Eric Sams's exegetic study of 1961, which includes a leitmotivic catalog supplemented with hermeneutic commentary, is a case in point. Comparing the, of the 40 motifs that Sams identifies in Wolf's songs, motif 23, the augmented triad, is unique in referring to a single chord rather than a rhythm or gesture. More interesting still is the connection that Sams draws between the augmented triad and his motif 24, which he names Light 1 and describes as follows, quote, "This idea is motif 23 writ large. Instead of, say, the notes C, E, G sharp together, passages in the tonalities of C major, E major, and G sharp major are heard consecutively in ascending order." In hearing sequential major third relations across Wolf's songs in this way, Sams anticipates significant claims that neo-Riemannian theorists have made about a perfectly even triad's relationship to the hexatonic cycle. It is difficult to imagine a clearer or more beautiful example of this augmented triad writ large than the morning glow that Sams identifies in Wolf's 1890 setting of Goethe's Ganymede. As the harp-like triads that open the song mount first from D major to F sharp major at the downbeat of bar 5, and then from F sharp major to B flat major at bar 8, the shimmering eighth note arpeggiations in the piano right hand crescendo to pregnant lacunae at each transformation. Wolf's harmony adorns Goethe's literary homoerotic text with moments of breathless transcendence, wholly in keeping with neo-Riemannian theory's characterization of the LP progression as semantically associated with experiences of the supernatural and ecstatic. Clearly, such a passage should hardly lend itself more readily to a hexatonic analytical approach. Yet the legitimacy of the connection that Sams is so keen to make between motifs 23 and 24 in his analyses, the augmented triad of Abschied and the augmented triad writ large of Ganymede, raises serious questions pertaining to neo-Riemannian theory and its shifting relationship to Weitzmann's treatise. In the year 2000, Richard Cohn published an article in Music Theory Spectrum commenting on some striking points of similarity between ideas expressed in Der übermäßige Dreiklang on the one hand and the hexatonic system that he had outlined in music analysis 4 years earlier on the other. The 2000 article effectively re-engineers Weitzmann's illustration of the 6 parsimonious resolutions of augmented triads in order to demonstrate a connection between Cohn's hexatonic graph and Weitzmann's table. This figure ground reversal, as the author refers to it, starts from example 5, a direct citation from Weitzmann's treatise, where the 4 augmented triads are presented on staff notation, annotated with letters representing the 6 consonant triads, or Klänge, to which they are related by single or double semitone displacements. Renaming each of these 4 groups of 6 Klänge a Weitzmann region, Cohn, in his example 6, removes the notated augmented triads, bracketing and abstracting them as stems from which the consonant triads of each region branch out to one another. Renaming this graph once more, he groups the 3 major triads of each region and the 3 minor triads of its neighbour together and vice versa. This final twist creates the northern, eastern, western and southern regions of the hyperhexatonic system, effectively wiping the augmented triad off the map. Back in the year 2000, this reversal of figure and ground isolated the consonant near-even resolutions of augmented triads from the perfectly even chords that generate them in Weitzmann's treatise. The very triad that Weitzmann boldly argued in 1853 to be a natural foe of our society of sonorities was cast ever further into the shadows of the neo-Riemannian kingdom of tones precisely because of the symmetry for which our historical theorist prized it so highly. More than a decade after this initial invocation of the Weitzmannian augmented triad, however, the 1853 treatise is being reappraised by neo-Riemannians in an altogether more historicist light. Compare, for example, Cohn's Weitzmann graph, introduced in 2000, with the modified version that appears in 2012's Audacious Euphony. The pitch classes of the 4 augmented triads have been unbracketed in the new model, which shows the hexaconic systems as pools overlapping with but distinct from the 4 Weitzmann waterbuds, as Cohn calls them. Crucially, the hexatonic systems here cohabit the same space as the Weitzmann graph, rather than supplanting it. The very figure that once served as a missing link between Weitzmann's graph and Cohn's has, 12 years on, been foregrounded as a hybrid system with which to map motion between 2 coextensive models of tonal space. Jack Dalfort's Cube Dance, like Cohn's revised waterbud graph, follows the sense of Weitzmann's treatise in modelling major third-related keys as tethered to augmented triads. In striking congruence with Dalfort's conception of the augmented triad's role in facilitating modulations by third, Weitzmann even provides a figure illustrating the capacity of Aug1 to resolve to each of the major triads built on its constituent tones by single semitone displacements. Wolf's Das Ständchen, the text and score of which are reproduced on pages 2 through 5 of your handout, demonstrates how a single augmented triad can mediate between major third-related keys following Weitzmann's and Dalbert's figures. The 4 stanzas of Eichendorff's poem, each of which states the Aug-3 triad on the musical foreground, correspond to a sequential modulation through D major, F sharp major, and B flat major, with the final stanza returning to D to conclude the piece. This wistful drift through major third-related keys is evocative of the reveries of the poem's protagonist. Upon hearing a student serenading his sweetheart in the street, this listener ruminates through the song's successive stanzas on his own youthful serenades to a beloved now forever lost to him. After the young musician tunes the strings on his lute in a short piano introduction, the first stanza of the song passes, in its D major description of the student, through an Aug-3 triad on its way to F sharp major. Remarking that the sounds of the street recall those of former happy times, this stanza again highlights the Aug-3 triad before modulating to B flat major. Here the protagonist describes his own youthful serenades on the lute, striking the Aug-3 triad once more on his route home to D major, where, woken from his reveries, he poignantly remarks that his beloved has been borne away to her rest, urging the merry youth to sing on eternally. With each statement of the Aug-3 triad, Wolf introduces Weitzmann's all-important Nebenton on the flattened submediant, ready to become the third of the subsequent key's conic triad. The third of the present key is simultaneously highlighted to become the root of the tonic chord in the subsequent stanza. Wolf pits it out through repetitious intonations in the piano part, mimicking the characteristic strumming of the student's root. Appropriately, in a meta-song reflecting on the power of musical sound to transport us into realms of distant memory, it is precisely the monotone intonations of this serenading root that, emanating from the song within the song, pull ineluctably towards the root of the subsequent stanza. Cadential conicization may not occur for several bars, but when it does, Wolf's preparatory thematic treatment of the root tone and its attendant augmented triad have sufficiently fixed the new conic chord in the listener's ear to effect a seamless modulation. While the augmented triads in this example might, 10 years ago, have attracted little attention from hexatonic analysts as mere passing dissonances, historicist readings of Weitzmann's treatise have increasingly led theorists to consider the augmented triad's role as a foreground sonority. Wolf's modulatory procedure in Das Ständchen is just one example from the repertoire suggesting the utility of such a Weitzmannian twist on transformational theory. In light of the increasing reluctance of many theorists to align themselves with Neo-Riemannianism by that name, and the extent to which der Übermäßige Dreiklang has been drawn on as a 19th century source independent from the towering figure of Hugo Riemann, an awareness of the tensions between Weitzmann's theory and our own is of vital importance. While the augmented triad, like the overgrown nose that it underscores in Abschied, has too often been considered purely in terms of the shadows that it projects, Weitzmann's treatise, as a historical text, is itself also necessarily regarded through the interpretive lens of the theoretical present. As transformational theorists reflect on ever more diverse 19th century sources, the light in which we read this material needs constantly to be refocused and adjusted, even if dissonances between our methods of gazing at musical works and those of our predecessors must remain ultimately unresolved. Thank you.